Obi-Wan Kenobi has long been my favorite Jedi Knight. Along with him in my top 5 is, of course, the incredible Qui-Gon Jinn. I think of them as a great pairing, but it wasn't always that way. 8 years before Qui-Gon's untimely death at the hands of the Sith, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were just starting their relationship as Master and Padawan. The two were struggling to connect. They had very different views on how to approach the Force and exist within the Jedi Order. Qui-Gon was infatuated with Jedi prophecies and followed his instincts or the will of the Force itself over the Jedi Order's rules. Obi-Wan liked structure, discipline, and, despite some rebellious days as a youngling, obedience to the Jedi Code. These differing ideals created a lot of tension between the two as they both felt odd around the other while carrying out their duties. Early on in this apprenticeship, Qui-Gon is offered a seat on the Jedi Council, an offer neither he nor Obi-Wan was expected would happen given Qui-Gon's nature. To sit on the Jedi Council is a huge honor. The main hang-up that Qui-Gon had is that he would have to give up being Obi-Wan's master. Despite that, Qui-Gon is considering the position, and even reasons to himself it may be better for Obi-Wan since the two are not getting along. He doesn't want to make a hasty decision when he's contacted by an old friend, the Jedi Knight Rael Averross. Averross was Dooku's apprentice before Qui-Gon. This is, of course, before Dooku fell to the dark side. The two bonded over their shared master. Averross was very loose with the rules, but didn't have the calm, thoughtful demeanor that Qui-Gon commands. There will be a transmission all about Averross in the future. He's a very interesting case study. For the purposes of this story, he was the Lord Regent of Pajal. Now, Pajal was a planet made up of island continents separated by vast oceans. It sounds picturesque except for these solar flares that wreak havoc on the planet that occur every decade or so. Pajal has a single moon that's almost the same size as the planet itself. After centuries of life going pretty well for the inhabitants, a nebula formed near the planet which interrupted hyperspace travel. The civilization was largely cut off from the galaxy and left heavily isolated. Pajal runs under a monarchy. When their adult rulers died, the throne passed to a 6-year-old girl, Fanry. Fanry couldn't actually rule until she turned 14. There was a lot of infighting on the planet, so the court reached out to the Galactic Senate and the Jedi Council, requesting that a representative be sent to rule, objectively, over Pajal until Fanry would come of age. Averross was chosen for this position. At the time that Averross reaches out to Qui-Gon Jinn, Fanry is about to undergo her coronation, making her the actual official ruler. Along with this is a ratification of a treaty between two opposing factions. The treaty would, ideally, see economic prosperity return to the planet within new hyperspace lanes, opening up trade. That is the ideal scenario. The reality looks to be a lot different. A third faction makes itself known through acts of terrorism. They call themselves simply the Opposition. Their goal is to make sure that this treaty does not occur. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan make it to the planet to find things are worse than they were led to believe. The government is in a fragile state and largely controlled by the Zerka Corporation, a major mining corporation that came to mine the planet and its moon. This corporation has a long-standing history of exploiting resource-rich planets and even indenturing, enslaving, their workers. Qui-Gon, understandably, finds all of this disturbing. He questions why the Order he serves and the Galactic Senate are supporting a treaty that enables corporate control of a government, slavery, and oppression. Now, I'm hoping this sounds familiar for the events that are going to occur in the galaxy in not quite a decade. Averross, who was already a very unconventional Jedi, is nothing at all like a Jedi when Qui-Gon sees him for the first time in years. He's informal, rugged. He doesn't check in with the Order. He's even having a physical relationship with a woman. He's also very attached to Fanry and sees her more as a daughter than the princess that he's supposed to be coaching, waiting to take the throne. Part of the explanation for Averross's unconventional look and actions is all the time away from the structure of the Order. He'd been on Pajal for 8 years. He was sent there after his Padawan, Nim Piana, was killed. The Jedi Order always had a weird way of mourning the loss that has been prevalent in some more recent Star Wars stories. Not being able to properly cope with her loss and then being sent away from the Order he knew, the structure of his life, it makes sense that he would find a new life and one that would be a lot looser on rules. Despite all of this, Averross doesn't see that he's lost his way. He believes in his mission and that he's doing the best he can for Pajal. It's clear, not only to Qui-Gon, but the young Obi-Wan Kenobi as well, that his past is clouding his judgment. Throughout the story, Qui-Gon is fixated on visions and prophecies. Many other Jedi approach the subject more carefully, but Qui-Gon has spent years studying them. During Qui-Gon's own apprenticeship, his master, Dooku, also had a lot of faith in this aspect of the Force. The two agreed that understanding them was a way to understand the will of the Force more fully. These moments were cool foreshadowing for what we all know would be coming, but also gave reasons for Qui-Gon to take his eventual meeting with Anakin Skywalker that much more seriously. Obi-Wan thought Qui-Gon hanging on to prophecies was irresponsible. He thought a master should follow the Jedi teachings and rely on more substantial things. He was already feeling abandoned when he learned that Qui-Gon was offered a seat on the Council. The thought of Qui-Gon turning the opportunity down doesn't cross his mind. Obi-Wan internalizes the issue and builds it up worse in his head than it actually is. He's well aware the two of them are not gelling and thinks that the appointment to the Council and terminating the relationship is proof that Qui-Gon never wanted Obi-Wan as a Padawan in the first place. Obi-Wan did sit in, I believe it's called the creche, longer than most younglings unable to find a master because of his troubled youth. The whole mission on Pajal brings their relationship to a breaking point. Their differing points of view on how to act as Jedi is very clear in how they want to handle the case. Qui-Gon wants to investigate a pair of thieves, thinking they're attached to the opposition. Obi-Wan thinks that fortifying Pajal's defenses for whatever may come their way is the more prudent move. Neither is wrong in their approach. It's the fact that they can't see eye to eye on anything that's important. There's not even any compromise for a while. One of the thieves, Rahara Wick, cleared them as far as being involved with the terrorist group. She was guilty of being a thief, but after revealing details of her past, the Jedi could overlook her crimes. She was born into slavery and ended up on Pajal against her will. This was confirmation to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan that the Zerka Corporation was as bad as they were led to believe, and that they were, in fact, corrupting this planet. Fun little tidbit. Author Claudia Gray said that she would have cast Gemma Chan to play Rahara. Gemma Chan is a talented actress and absolutely gorgeous, so keep that in mind when you're reading Master and Apprentice. There are spoilers coming for the end of this story. If you want to experience it for yourself, pick up a copy of Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Be sure to come back here after you finish reading it, since I'll be breaking down parts and reviewing it properly once I'm done recapping it. As Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan uncover more and more details about all the internal conflicts, there's a pretty solid twist. The opposition, branded a terrorist group, turns out to not be the villain of the story after all. Fanry is actually behind all of the terrible things happening to her own people. She wanted to make sure that she would not be a pawn for Zerka once she was sworn in at 14 years old. Her plan was to take full power all for herself and separate from not just Averross's influence, but the reach of the entire Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic. At her coronation, she declares the planet's independence. She then sets loose a team of assassin droids she secretly obtained. They were tasked with killing all 3 Jedi. She didn't create all the strife on Pajal, but she is definitely taking advantage of it on her path to becoming an unchecked dictator, all while framing it on being a liberator. Averross takes this reveal and betrayal very hard. He was still dealing with the death of his Padawan, then he spent years with this young girl he saw as something of a daughter. He realized his grief and being overly attached was blinding him to what was really going on. The visions Qui-Gon had been studying became clear. He was misinterpreting, but believed he now saw the true purpose. The Jedi, and some allies they made along the way, engage in a battle with Fanry's forces. Her coup was a good attempt, but the Jedi win the day, and she's taken into captivity. She's stripped of her powers and removed from office. Under the guidance of the Jedi, the ruling body of Pajal restructures a treaty to make sure that the Zerka can no longer operate on the planet. This is a move that frees the planet from corporate control and a powerful dictator. Again, nice nods to the larger Star Wars narrative that's approaching in the prequel trilogy. When the larger narrative settles down, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have a quiet moment to reconcile. Qui-Gon turns down the Jedi Council's offer for him to join. He does this specifically to remain Obi-Wan's master. Both the Master and the Apprentice move their standing and their positions a bit closer to each other. They found common ground on this mission and respect the other as an individual and are able to see, at least somewhat, from the other person's perspective, that certain point of view that's always prevalent. Qui-Gon doesn't give up on the idea of prophecies and tries to follow them in the Force, but he does admit that they need to be more carefully interpreted. Obi-Wan realizes following a set of rules too strictly can be a hindrance in some situations. While there is a large, expansive story and some cool bits of action, and even a solidly executed plot twist, the real thrust of this novel is the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, at least for me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. I found it came up short in this respect. The story does a good job shining light on their philosophical differences, which created some strain, but it never dug deep enough for my liking. I would have liked a bit more nuance in how they differed and also how they overcame those differences. Even having some more common ground as they were navigating the philosophical differences would have bolstered the relationship that we see them in during the events of The Phantom Menace. This novel was my introduction to Rael Averross, and I really liked how his character was handled. I know the Jedi and Sith, the light and the dark sides, are intentionally binary, and a simple morality tale. A Jedi, like Rael, who is falling into very human trappings, not dealing with grief and loss properly, grounds the character in a very real way, despite his larger-than-life position as a Jedi Knight. Within the story, I liked him being a counterbalance to Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon is a dedicated Jedi who follows the will of the Force and is always in pursuit of deeper truths. Averross doesn't have a real purpose. He distracts himself with things he shouldn't be into. Especially with Averross and Qui-Gon both being Padawans of Dooku, it shows the possible paths a Jedi could take if they let loss and failure define them. Averross never even dips a toe into the dark side, and I'm also glad it didn't go that way. Far too many stories, canon, legends, whatever you want to call it, in the entirety of the Star Wars universe have people go into the dark side and within the course of one book or a few comic books or even a movie come back to the light. It's not supposed to be that easy. Yoda says that forever will it dominate your destiny. Luke pulling Vader out of the dark side was a huge accomplishment. The more this happens, the less that means. I don't like the watering down of it. So having Rael kind of lose his way, but not in a matter of being evil, was spot on. This next bit might be a strange offshoot, but the fact that Averross was having a physical relationship needs to be addressed. Far too many more recent Star Wars stories, especially novels and comics, bring up physical adult relationships. The High Republic, while I'm really enjoying it, has too many encounters amongst Jedi characters of this nature. Even the awesome prequel-era novel, Dark Disciple, has too much of it. I'm not against these types of story in general. Some adult content here and there is completely fine. They just feel out of place if they're so prevalent in Star Wars. It's brought up too frequently, especially when dealing with Jedi characters who swear oaths and are supposed to be at a higher standard. What was interesting about Averross's relationship is he acknowledged that the Jedi were not supposed to have these types of relationships because of attachments. He said his pursuits were purely physical. There was no care behind it at all. Obviously, he's playing fast and loose with the rules, interpreting them to fit his wants. That's the entire point. It was a really interesting angle to take on exploring this kind of thing without a Jedi knowingly breaking his oaths, at least not admitting it to himself. There were some very clear and direct references to the larger Star Wars narrative. Qui-Gon, focusing on prophecies, not only had some references that could easily be interpreted as the events of the prequel trilogy, I thought it was a little weird when they were attributed to the direct events of the novel, almost nullifying the larger picture, but that's still how I see them. I don't know if we were supposed to see Qui-Gon as wrong for interpreting them this way, maybe he was looking at too small of a picture and they were actually for the larger plot, or if they were for both, or I don't know. I feel like by the end of the book I shouldn't be confused about this. They should not have been attributed to these smaller meanings in just this story. The more interesting way to handle them would have been that Qui-Gon realized focusing too much on the future and not the task at hand made him miss things that he should have seen. That would pay off in the Phantom Menace line about focusing on the here and now while being mindful of the future. Speaking of Phantom Menace lines, another element of this novel rubbed me the wrong way, and it was the offer for Qui-Gon to be on the Council. In The Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan protests Qui-Gon's rogue thoughts by saying if he would follow the code, he could be on the Council. This novel having Qui-Gon be offered the seat and then turning it down, and Obi-Wan being upset by it, contradicts this line entirely, and that line was really important for us getting to know who Qui-Gon was, even though we only get to spend one movie with him. I'm also not sure why Qui-Gon would have to give up Obi-Wan as a Padawan at all. Depa Billaba had Caleb Dune as a Padawan, Ki-Adi Mundi had Asharad, Yoda had Dooku. More information is probably outside the scope of this novel, but since this was a major factor of the story that lingered over everything the two characters did, some explanation would have been nice. The most obvious connections, the ones I appreciated the most, actually were Dooku's growing disillusionment with the Council foreshadowing his turn. The very clear corporate corruption undermining a government and showing the rigidity of the Jedi Order, which would lead to their downfall. These elements were all on the nose for what any reader knows is coming, but I did like the effort to put them into the story. All things considered, Master and Apprentice fell a little short for me. I didn't get to spend as much time with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan as I wanted. I never felt attached to the novel's specific narrative. The twist was a welcome change of pace that piqued my interest, but I found a lot of it I was reading to get to the next bit about Obi-Wan and or Qui-Gon. I didn't dislike the Qui-Gon Obi-Wan stuff, I just wanted more of it and more nuance to flesh things out smoother. I did really like Averross, and he was the standout new element for me. Though this novel missed the mark for me, I don't mean to disparage the work of Claudia Gray. She's an incredibly talented writer who did some books that I absolutely love in the Star Wars saga. She's done great work developing Leia further in Bloodline and Leia, Princess of Alderaan. She contributed to a couple of the Certain Point of View short story collections and wrote the second High Republic novel, which introduces my favorite villain from that era, the Drengir. Check out this transmission next for more Star Wars novels that you should be checking out.